name is Alexandra Terry. I'm the Curator of Contemporary Art here at the New Mexico Museum of Art. And it is my pleasure to be here in conversation this evening with Mokha Laget. Thank you for joining us. So Mokha is our third artist in residence for the inaugural year of our Artist in Residence program. Yes, thank you. And I would like to thank the Frederick Hammersley Fund for the Arts at the Albuquerque Community Foundation for their generous grant which funded this residency. So we've had Oswaldo Macia, Angela Ellsworth that preceded Mokha, and this Sunday Alex Trout will take up the artist studio. And I'm really excited to say that after this inaugural year, we will open up the Artist in Residence program for applicants. So if any of you are interested, as the only one who might be, please check our website. But it has been a real delight to work with Mokha these last 4 weeks. And I'm just really glad that we have this evening to sort of wrap things up. So we will be in conversation as we delve into her practice and witness some of the exciting projects she has been developing and working on here in advance of arriving here. Following our conversation, we will open it up to the audience for a brief Q&A, and finally there will be a reception that is so generously hosted by the Turner Carroll Gallery to celebrate Mokha and to just top off this wonderful evening. So to begin, I'd like to read Mokha's bio. Mokha Laget is a New Mexico-based interdisciplinary artist known for her geometric abstractions on shaped canvas and visual scores. A passionate colorist, Mokha was born in North Africa, a region of radiant light and dramatic geographical contrasts. Inspired by science, architecture, and music, encountered in her studies and travel, her work explores the gentle chaos of perceptual psychology through spatial and sonic perspective. Initially trained in Old Masters techniques in the south of France, she then studied fine arts at the Corcoran College of Art and Design in Washington, D.C. She also holds a degree from Georgetown University School of Foreign Service in simultaneous interpreting and translation, and has spent much of the past 25 years traveling parts of Africa, Latin America, and Asia. She has exhibited consistently for the past 35 years, both nationally and internationally, and is represented in numerous museum collections. In 2019, she received a Pollock-Krasner Foundation Award, and in 2023, she was invited as a visiting artist to the American Academy in Rome. A 10-year survey exhibition of her work opened at the American University Museum in Washington, D.C. in 2022. And during her residency, Mokha explored a visual interpretation of the new architecture of the Vladem. So it was really interesting to have her here during this time, in the first year that the building is in existence. She also arranged a collaborative experimental music performance that was held at the St. Francis Auditorium, which I hope some of you who are here were able to attend. It was truly spectacular, and I hope there are more such events to come. And so the format of this evening, Mokha has prepared a presentation and will be presenting slides and images, and we will be having a conversation while we're going through the slides. So with no further ado, Mokha Laget.
Thank you very much, Alexandra, for that warm introduction, and I'm grateful to the New Mexico Museum of Art and the entire team. It's been fantastic during this past month. It's been a great privilege to be in the Vladem's beautiful and sunny studio for the past month, truly. So when I began thinking about this talk and my practice in terms of a multicultural artist and different geographies and languages, this idea of the place and how that relates to identity was something that just kept coming back, because it has to do with the way that we process tensions to some degree that are inherent in multiple identities. And I think that to some degree the idea of a geographical displacement is something that finds its way in my work as a visual displacement, which you referenced the gentle chaos. So I'd like to give you a brief overview of my work in the last few years, and this will give you a context for the residency. I'll start with some various programs, projects, shows that I've done, and all of this hopefully will weave into the tapestry, the larger context. So my journey starts here. I was born in Oran, Algeria, a fairly large country in North Africa, and here I am in Santa Fe, 5,500 miles away. But the crazy thing, and I discovered this a few years ago, is that if you look at the latitude, we've got 35.69 degrees north in Oran and 35.68 degrees in Santa Fe. So it's maybe no surprise that I'm here. This quality of light and the climate and so many more overlaps, that this was really the place that I wanted to be. And I think we oftentimes end up living someplace out of circumstance. I mean, I certainly came to the United States out of circumstance through my parents, but I chose to live in New Mexico. And I think the choice of place makes a difference in how you live and how you resonate with your practice as an artist. And the other thing that's interesting with these two locations is that there was a great deal of geometry in both places. Again, in North Africa, of course, the Berber designs and presence of geometric patterns, and here, obviously, Native American designs. And also, what's interesting is that the women were the ones who were doing the patterns, the basket or rug weaving, or so. That requires some pretty good math skills. But the strong female tradition of geometry. And the other thing I mentioned about North Africa is that's also where I saw my first mirage. So this, as a young child, this kind of solidified the notion that there's a lot of uncertainty in the world, and what you see is not always what's there. There's shape shifting that goes on, but that's also kind of a fun idea. So I say this because all of these elements find their way back into my work in some way. This is another view of the parallels. I mean, believe it or not, this is Algeria, and that's Taos, New Mexico. So very similar. And here again, I think that it's not just the beauty of the land and the ochres, but this architecture is something that has found its way in my work as a choreography of light, and they're structures that are activated by light and illusion, which happen, and we're very imprinted as children by light. And you see some artists who grow up in the northern latitudes tend to favor bluer tonalities, and I'm certainly in the latter category where the Mediterranean has more of these golden colors. Now, this next slide this is my studio. This is where I live and work with my garden. It's about 45 minutes outside of Santa Fe. And in 1995, I came here on an interpreting assignment. And in the space of one weekend, I had bought 20 acres. There was no electricity, there was no road, there was no well, nothing. But I had this vision that I was going to build a solar home and studio. And ultimately I did. It took a while. But at the time I was told that the best way to locate a well was to hire a dowser. And when I told this to my stepdad, who's a geologist, he thought that I had gone like full Santa Fe woo-woo, lost gods. But as it turned out, I did hire dowsers, and I'd learned to do it myself, and I had a great weld still. And so this was taken during the monsoon season, which, if you live here, you know, is just this amazing power of nature at work. And it's a magical place to be. That said, I have to say that the best thing about the Vladem, because I have a well, but I have no sink in my studio. So having a sink at the Vladem studio was just pure luxury. And it's not that we couldn't put in a sink, it's just that the soil is so rocky that we couldn't get below the frost line. And anyway, so a lot of gallon jugs. So I'll start with this show, this is an installation shot of the show at American University, which you mentioned earlier, the 10-year survey. And I have a long history with DC, going back to my years as a student at the Corcoran School of Art, now College of Art and Design, and also as a studio assistant to Gene Davis, who with Morris Lewis and Kenneth Nolan were part of this loosely connected group called the Washington Color School. They didn't really have a lot in common except large canvases on paintings on raw canvas, exploration of color, but many of them were under this very strong-fisted influence of Clement Greenberg, who told them that there shall be no depth, there shall be no texture, there shall be, et cetera, these dictates, right, that basically these artists stuck to. And so I always felt that there was something in DC that hadn't been done, and not just DC, but in geometric abstractions a whole. And what happened for some of these artists too, like Gene Davis, that they started getting pigeonholed. Like for him, it was the stripe. And they also had this notion that to be a recognized artist, you had to make work that, as he put it, you could recognize from a speeding car. But that resulted in basically not being able to get out of their own way. And at the Corcoran, they were very aware of the gender imbalances, and the faculty was very balanced. They had these tag team teaching with male, female professors that came to the artist. But as a woman artist in the 80s in DC, I was very aware that the whole scene was dominated by male artists. But curiously, this geometric abstraction was, I only really saw it in Latin America or in Europe, right? Ligia Papa in Brazil, Sonia de René in France. So here again, I had the sense that there was unfinished business. Perceptualism, that was the title of the show, and again, perception was important because I was dealing with spatial ambiguity and contradictory spaces and light sources. This is an installation view of that baby show. We wanted to really get the works out of the traditional frames on the wall and activate the scale. And this was tricky too, because most of the walls were curved. And so the curators were very concerned about getting these curved shadows under the pieces. And ultimately, we were happy with it. We managed to get the lights just right. And so let's go to the next slide. This is a slide taken at Container, Turner Carroll. The show traveled from DC to Container. And this view shows a couple of kites, which were also in the show at DU. And the reason I included that was because kites are something that are so universal. They're in every culture, in every civilization. Every kid flies a kite. And it's not just the dream about flight, but it also goes to this idea of unpredictability and turbulence and invisible turbulence that goes back to these thematics that I'm interested in. Here is a version of a kite that was done based on my first visit to the museum, and it was in October, I believe. And I took these images because I was so fascinated with the way that these shadows were progressing on the wall, and manipulated the images, the photos, to print the kites. But then when the show happened, it was June, and so all of the patterns, I was imagining the patterns meshing at some point, but it would have had to be in October. This is a show that was at Brian Gross Gallery, and it's just to give an idea of the scale and the presence of the works. And I love that dark floor with the reflections. This is another show I did in 2019 in New York City with the David Richard Gallery. Typical corridor New York space. And this is called Watershed 3. It measures 45 feet, width, and it's currently hanging at the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in Washington, D.C. It's actually 7 panels. I had been invited to propose a piece for the 70-foot wall after Sam Gilliam, who was a dear color school colleague in D.C., passed away, and when his estate basically took the piece, like he had a big draped painting, then they invited me to put this piece there, which was wonderful. So it's still there, if you're ever down. I know. Let's see. So this brings us to Vladem, because I've talked about the choreography of light and shadow in architecture, and I've long been fascinated with this. And during my residency at the Vladem, I went around and took a lot of photographs, because I noticed that other than the architecture, what's so fascinating is these reflections that are everywhere, just multiple overlapping reflections. This actually, to the right, is a photo of the north entrance of the Vladem, and to the left is one of the Capriccio paintings, which I named them Capriccio because it's an Italian word which refers to fantastical architecture, and it's also a musical term for an improvisational piece of music. So the two actually come together in that title. Just a note about photography, because it's been such an important tool for my work historically. I don't show my photography, but it's something that I really use to hone my eye and continue training my eye on composition, texture, things of that nature, and things like this. Here's a view inside the studio, and you see the rail runner down below. And I love this element of the architecture because Devendra, the architect, planned these floor windows throughout the space. And the idea was to stay connected with the community, right? Not to be in this ivory tower of a museum or a studio. And so I felt very much connected to what was going on outside. And then above that are the collages that I brought in really to see how they would interact with the shape paintings and how and other works that I was trying out in the studio. And I realized that ultimately, even if you think you're doing things that are completely different, somewhere there's always a thread. There's always something that you are exploring that is just you. And this one I'm particularly interested in because the photo on the right was taken 2 weeks ago. The painting on the left was done 2 years ago. So I love this idea that the painting kind of prefigured the photograph. But this is what I was saying about this kind of unconscious intentionality, which if you are really following that awareness, then the coherence is there. It's always with you.
Well, actually, look, if I'm going to interject, there's something that I was picking up on that really sort of culminates in this relationship, which has to do with translation. And we will get further into that in the ways that you have translated your work, but I was thinking about the kites, and I was thinking about the different spaces that you've installed your work, and then thinking about this consciousness that you have tapped into. You know, I mean, this is so uncanny. The relationship between this and even the other, this slide that shows the relationship between that piece you made and that photograph. I mean, there are even these really uncanny connections. But what I'm understanding about you and your practice is the way that you translate your work into other states and other ways of your multiple audiences connecting to the work. And I wonder how that relates to, I mean, you know, your work as a translator obviously comes from somewhere that there was a desire to be a mediator, maybe, and we'll talk about the performance work and the choreography of things, but how do you see yourself as a translator of your work through different materials, different media, different spaces?
Well, it's a good question because I don't know that I was trying to be a mediator. I needed a job. So when after I graduated from the Corcoran, I realized 10 years on that I was doing everything possible that I could and still struggling. So that's when I went back to Georgetown and got a degree in interpreting, and thus began this incredible journey of interpreting, which is, and just to make the distinction, is the oral form is simultaneous. So when someone speaks and I speak at the same time in a different language, as opposed to translation, which traditionally is more of a written form. But the interpreter part of it absolutely applies to ideas, concepts, nuance, words, images, line, color, shape in big art. And for a long time, I held these two activities as quite separate because on the one hand, I'm interpreting for heads of states and being in this world that has nothing to do with art, and then going back to the studio and how does this mesh? But ultimately, it's really about trusting the process and realizing that, yes, you're doing the same things. In French, we say, when talking about a theater actor, we call them interpreters. We don't call them actors. So this is, and just like music, musicians are interpreting the piece. So again, it's a kind of holistic approach now in terms of interpreting, and photography is also that for me. And in the language interpretation, you're constantly having to focus on nuance and meaning. Did he really say that? Is that, what degree of language is that? What degree of emotion is it? What are you trying to say without saying? And so that does also come back into the work. And when the work in the studio wants to go in a particular area, and a technique or an expression that I've never encountered, I have to go there. And I realized that like some of these very abstract pieces that I'm not going to show, but I've been doing. When people look at them and talk about them, they are using the same vocabulary as for the shaped canvases, whereas they have nothing to do with the shaped canvas. So, I don't know if that answers your question.
Definitely, absolutely. I think that's.
So, let's move to this piece. This piece is called Sightlines, and it's actually hanging upstairs in the galleries. It's going to be here until September, right? So you'll have a chance to see it. And this is a large shaped canvas, and I didn't make it here. I knew that I wouldn't be able to fabricate something this large here. So it was when I was doing the first walkthrough in the museum that I was looking at it in terms of, how could I make an homage to the architecture of the buildings and the building in and of itself. And so I made this piece, and it's not anything didactic, taking specific areas of the museum and so forth, but it does look like the museum in a way, and so it's because it's a kind of universal architecture that it reflects. It's speculative, hypothetical, but universal in that sense. This is a piece that this shot was taken in the studio upstairs, and this piece I actually did finish here. I brought it as a rolled piece of canvas. I had started it during COVID and was never able to finish it. It was really at the heart of lockdown. That was just, I guess, trying to get some liberation in that. And as soon as I visited the studio and I saw that big wall, I knew right away that I had to bring it back and finish it, and that the architecture would help to do that. So there it is, it's finished. It's not even titled yet. So, and this is going to get us back a little bit to what we were saying about interpreting, because the piece on the left is one of the visual scores. It's a drawing that goes along with the whole series of pastel works, which have been interpreted by musicians, experimental musicians, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. The photo on the right was taken in Mauritania. This was 2006 when I was on an assignment. And at the end of the assignment, the Mauritanian women, out of gratitude or just to be nice, decided that they wanted to honor me with these henna designs on my hands and my feet. And for 5 hours, I was like this. I couldn't move because it has to set in. But the reason that I put these two together, so I'm interpreting, and there obviously the artist that. Because I saw similarities in the shapes and the lines, and I thought, well, these henna designs could completely be interpreted as musical scores, because they're full of stories.
But I want to say that of course these can be interpreted, but that's just not an immediate reaction that that we would have collectively, and so to me that's really where this. And mediation is not the right word. I didn't mean it in that kind of sense, but it's bringing it through. It's channeling the information into these different forms that I think touch us in different ways.
Well, in the case of the musical scores, what's been interesting is that I do make them in silence. There's if you, I don't know how many of you know Paulino Olivares' work, the deep listening. And even just some of John Cage's work, where there's so much going on. And if you're really aware and paying attention, there's no silence. It doesn't exist. Nothing is ever silent. That's. And visual scores were really something that I think touched people that I had not, I was thinking of them as musical pieces, but it was more the response that I got from musicians that really pushed this. development. And so the mediation in that sense was almost external.
Yeah.
But in my mind, it was an obvious progression.
Well, and I think you're creating moments of recognition. So you're creating an opportunity for recognition that perhaps a musician would immediately have that inherent understanding. And then there are other ways in which you present your work where you're creating another entry point for dance or, for various other ways to interpret the work.
Yeah. And I'll play a little clip of a piece that was bringing these two elements together, the shaped canvas and the musical element. This was one of my first collaboration with Mokha Laget. And I'll just play a small clip, and I apologize because there's going to be several of these clips, and I'm going to have to cut them off because they're too long, but at least to give you an idea. Unfortunately, it's a little bright in here. But we use movement tracking and projection mapping techniques to reveal the light sources and create the sonification. But you can kind of see some of the visual scores that are, and then the whole painting has been masked off. So here we're getting to a larger painting. This is called Moroccan Capriccio, and this was performed several times. The last few months ago it was performed at the Chicago Symphony Civic Orchestra Chamber Series, and it was based on this painting called Moroccan Capriccio, which I had done in Morocco during a residency. And I was investigating, again, this idea of the historical architecture, but from the point of view of these neighborhoods of Christian, Jewish, Muslim architecture that had coexisted for centuries and still coexisted. These cultures were trading and living side by side. And I thought, well, if I could pick out elements of all of these various architectures, you wouldn't even be able to tell what's what, who's who. And when a couple of years later I was at another residency, I met a young composer, and we had these great discussions. He's now getting his PhD at Princeton and composing, but he resonated so much with paintings, and I resonated with his music that we decided to do a collaboration. And this is the result. His name is Bobby G. The interesting thing with Bobby is that he decided that he would make a score of my score. So and this is basically a piece that is now played in our places. Very different. I'll play just a couple more short pieces, and then we'll just open it up. You mentioned the American Academy in Rome. I was there for a month in October 23, and I also did a long linen score there, which was played by two musicians. Let me move this forward. We can get some of this. We had a gong percussionist and a Alexandra Terry, who had just graduated from an experimental music program in Rome. And the two of them had never met, and they were just basically playing off of each other and the score at the same time. So, a little closer to home, this is the piece that was at the St. Francis Auditorium a couple weeks ago. It was a performance called Extempo, and there were 4 sets that we did. And I'm just going to show the last part because this is a piece that Morgan Barnard, my collaborator, and I worked on. We each had a mixing board, and we were able to control the elements of the painting that had been isolated and were moving. So both in the sound, in transparencies, all kinds of elements that we could translate. There was a rear screen projection, which really doesn't look like much here because the screen is so light. And we are actually off to the side, but I'm manipulating the shapes. Doc, you can see some of those.
So another sort of thought that came up for me that feels parallel is this notion of animation. And when we were talking in preparation for this conversation, talked about animation and animating the work. And I'm really interested in thinking of that term as this idea of bringing to life.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it feels very parallel to me with the interpretation, which is you finding other and new ways to bring the work to life. And when we think of painting historically, we often think of something very static. And what is fascinating about your practice is the ways in which you animate and bring the work not only off the kind of static materiality, but you give it this afterlife. So once someone has been able to witness a performance like this or see this type of work, it's something that I think they'll be able to see through your work. And this morning, we were looking at the collage work, we were looking at the shaped canvases, and you really brought that up again, this idea that it's coming off of the wall.
Yes. It's interesting hearing you actually talk about that because for me, it's so innate at this point, right? That I have to kind of take a step back. But the shaped canvases have this aspect also where your eye is constantly moving within it because of the contradictory spaces and the contradictory, the ambiguous light sources. So your eye is moving, and maybe that was the next step was to animate the image. But in all cases, it's about the dialogue between the eye and the brain, or the brain and the language, and this dialogue, this interaction. But ultimately, I think you have to let go of the brain to just feel and go where the work is asking to go, which in my case was the next step from all of this movement was the animation.
And if we think about that quote, if we look back at these sort of the entrenchment of certain art historical movements, and we think about the colorists and that idea that you should be able to see it from a passing car, you've sort of flipped that on its head. It's like the work is the car that's zooming past. It's creating this, this color, and then you see that, and if it's dark outside, you see the lights come by. It's, when you're standing in front of the work, there's a great amount of movement. And then that also goes back to this idea of choreography. It's like you've choreographed movement within this plane.
So, yeah. Well, part of that is just the nature of how I operate. I'm always, I need movement. And not just movement, but for instance, I will rarely go the same way twice to get to the same point. I need to discover, I need to go another itinerary. And it's something that's, like I said, very, very neat at this point. Let's see. I have, well, that isn't any of and I have actually just one more slide before the very last one you got. And this was at the IAIA Dome. This was the last performance that we did. And I'm just going to play a few seconds of it. The musician had just graduated from IAIA. It was Nelson Albuquerque, and just did this very luscious music to it. So I just wanted to end with that. Let's see. Oh, excellent. So, there is see thing. So, yep, it's right. And here we isolated, again, elements of the visual scores and animated them. And you have to imagine this on a concave dome, and so this here we talk about the movement. You're really being projected into space, and elements are coming at you. It's really crazy. And you're in these chairs that are kind of lying down. So yes, interpretation of movement. Stop that. Collapse. Yes, that's all I have. Yeah. Slide-wise.
Thank you. So we have time for a few questions. Is there anybody who has anything or comments? Yes?
You talked about the interpretation of movement. Have you ever investigated or interpreted Vladem notation, which is a way of noting down choreography? It's almost like a score.
Well, scoring is such an interesting field because from Stockhausen to Cage to any number of visual score specialists, it's such a vast and still, I think, untapped area. And I liken it to some degree to concrete poetry. So at some point, you just need to have musicians who are willing to try to decipher all of that. So not really, I don't work with that particular scores, but it's a fascinating area because, and I think it's growing too, where, at some point the musicians, you have very experimental musicians who will interpret these scores as noise and in the most experimental way that music is progressing, and others that, as you've heard, who want to bring it back to more classical or contemporary type of music. But it's an open field. I think there's still a lot to be done.
Yeah, that's said.
Yes. Thank you so much for this wonderful discussion. It's a pleasure also to enjoy learning, but my question was, because the canvas appears, the artwork appears to be both inside and outside of the canvas, creating a more universal spatial location. So how do you think that really changes your work in the perception of it in a way that it's universal to be children?
Thank you, Beckett. Well, again, this is one of the elements that I'm interested in is the relationship with the viewer. I don't want to just present something and say, deal with it. And so this kind of relational aesthetic, I don't know if it's more of a feminine approach to geometry, but I care for the viewer. I want to have this engagement. And so if they see 3D illusionism and then see something completely flat, these are things that I've thought about, but there's no didactic ways. In other words, I'm not going to tell the viewer how to see it and what to see, but the piece will flip. It will continue to change. And to the point that even as an artist, when you're making a work, you are in a certain state of mind and expressing an idea or a feeling, but once it's done, you as the artist become a viewer. You're no longer in that space. And when you look at your work a year on, you're no longer the artist, the same artist. You're a viewer, just like all of you. So it's important to care, to take care, and to give that that freedom, that openness.
Thank you so much.
Wait a minute.
There was a question here.
Yeah. Mokha, I was thinking about this whole history of you, your day job and how demanding and social that is. And then where you live, where I live, and working in isolation. And I kind of feel like maybe you are pulling all these things into this more social aspect of your artistic, choices, because now you're actually trusting other artists to engage and control them.
Well, there are a couple points there, and thanks for that question, Karen. One is that certainly working in the studio, I'm very solitary in the studio, and if I author work in science, I don't have, unless I absolutely need to, I don't have assistants. I will work with fabricators sometimes outside, but and so it does get to be a very confined world to some degree. And when I get an assignment and I'm sent to Djibouti, West Africa, East Africa, the Horn of Africa, for 2 or 3 weeks, and I'm interpreting for things like, that could be, I'll give you a silly example. I did a project that was fixing engines that had been captured by some of the pirate ships in the Gulf of Yemen. So, and then but I'm constantly interacting in this social way. And so that dance, here again, this idea of a choreography is something that's very natural or pleasing to me, that you have to adapt very quickly. But I've been doing less of it since COVID. A lot of the projects went remote, online, so we're doing still interpreting online, but there's not this element of the social that is as significant. So perhaps, in fact, all of the work that I'm doing with my collaborators musically is fulfilling that part of it. But I'm certainly enjoying it more. But, being out in the Gulf again.
Yes. You mentioned early in the evening of seeing your first mirage, and I wondered if you could share what that was and how it impacted your work.
Well, in North Africa, there was, I remember this one trip that we'd taken in the desert to see the Sahara, and we were driving through, and I was very young, but everybody has seen these mirages right on the road where you see the kind of the water vapors, and then it's actually the heat waves, but it looks like water, right? But when you're 5-year-old, you're like, what is that? And we're getting closer and closer, but it disappears and it moves and it shifts. So, what is real, what is not? And these are elements that I use in my paintings. Is it coming forward? Is it receding? Is it moving? What is it doing? And what is it doing to me? What is it making me think about? And here, again, going back to the viewer, there is no single point of entry into any of these paintings. There's no single point of understanding. So, going back to the viewer, it's about what do you see? What does it do to you? How do you navigate this eye-brain dialogue? Or do you not? Or do you just take in the fact that things can shapeshift, and that's what's out there? And this element of play that I mentioned earlier is important, because we lose this ability of playing, as time goes by, and I like to bring back a little mischief.
I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah, hi. With all your work that I've seen, it's like, I just want to say that actually what you just said now. What I feel when I see your pieces, it's like I want to go in them. Like there's always an entrance. And before I want to go around the corner, I want to, so I'm like big shapeshifter with it. It's like, yeah, and this is amazing. I can see that covering the toast and the bank.
Right. Well, that was just a still shot of in the dome, right, of the works is coming up. But you're right, and that's where the illusion of the 3D on a 2D surface that is also accentuated by color, because color can be used as light. And so when the 3D information is giving you one sense, and the light or the implied light through color is giving you another bit of information that don't jive, and then there's this very sensual, tactile, gorgeous color. It's like, just take it in. There's nothing to figure out.
Thank you so much. Please join us outside for some wonderful refreshments. Thank you.